we'll do that in the normal way.
Joining me this evening to discuss the carbon scheme and other issues is the Liberal MP Josh Frydenberg in Melbourne and the Greens Senator Lee Rhiannon in Sydney. Thank you both for your time.
Thank you.
Hi Sam. Hi Lee.
Lee Rhiannon, to you first. The Greens were part of this carbon pricing deal with the government. It was always a risk, wasn't it, if you were too closely linked to Europe, that if Europe went down, Australia would go with it?
I don't think we can just say Europe's gone down. It's certainly disappointing what has happened, but
it's plunged. Not only has it gone down, it's down at €3. That's plunging, isn't it?
I think it's actually come back a little bit then. But what you say is correct. It's very serious. Firstly, with the response from the coalition today, we're seeing again their scare tactics. They only know one gear when it comes to handling the incredibly challenging issue of action on climate change. But with regard to what happened in Europe, it's obviously disappointing that the European Parliament didn't support the proposal that came from the European Commission, and that's called backloading is the term that they use. And what that would have meant, if it had been passed, would have been postponing the allocation of carbon emission permits in order to raise the price. Now, in effect, that was an emergency plan to force companies to pay more tax. Now, it isn't all over. This proposal is now with the Environment Committee of the European Parliament, and there's a number of countries, Germany, France and Great Britain, which are supporting the need for these measures.
All right,
so we need to work on it.
OK, well, Josh Frydenberg, I'll put to you the accusation there made by Lee Rhiannon that it's a scare tactic from the Shadow Treasurer Joe Hockey, that the tax cuts and the compensation might be at risk here.
The Greens are living in cuckoo land. I mean, this is the greatest embarrassment for Julia Gillard and for the Greens. I mean, the Australian carbon price now at $23, about to go up on the 1st of July this year and then again on the 1st of July next year, and then to $37 on Treasury modelling by 2020, is, you know, way ahead of where they are in Europe. I mean, currently it's about 550% greater than it is in Europe, and a multiple of that compared to the numbers in New Zealand. And this is going to create a huge black hole, Sam, for the government, because, as Joe Hockey has said, there's a whole lot of payouts and compensation that the government has promised that will, you know, be very difficult for it to adhere to, given the money will not be flowing from the carbon taxes as it promised. So this is a huge embarrassment for the government.
All right, well, I'll come to the Coalition's plans for the compensation and the tax cuts in a minute, but Lee Rhiannon, is the Greens' reputation at stake here as well? If there isn't a recovery in Europe over the coming 2 years, the Greens signed up to this deal. There was always the risk that Europe could plunge to these levels. Was it the wrong decision to link so closely to the European system? Look,
it wasn't the wrong decision. It was given careful consideration. Senator Christine Milne worked extensively on this and certainly gave a lead on this, and that's something that we're proud of. But a lot of the figures that Josh has thrown around are inaccurate. The $15 was the amount of the carbon tax by 2015, and yes, the floor price would change over time. Now, I've said it's disappointing. We've got a big challenge. Europe has been hard hit by the global financial crisis, so this needs to be carefully revisited. But it's in no way off the table, and to say again, Germany, Britain, France have got a commitment to following through on the proposal that came from the European Commission themselves. And the best way to advance the whole action on climate change is to have more ambitious targets in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. That's a key thing the Coalition should have the courage to talk about.
All right. Josh Frydenberg, you mentioned the compensation and the tax cuts that are linked to this carbon pricing system. The Coalition has said, of course, that the compensation will go because there will be no need for compensation once the carbon tax is abolished. But what about those tax cuts? Is the Coalition still committed to delivering those tax cuts in some form?
Well, we're absolutely committed to delivering tax cuts, because under this government, tax has only gone up. There's been more than 30 taxes have gone up, and under a coalition government, we'll get rid of a carbon tax and we'll get rid of a mining tax, and overall tax burden will be...
And you have to pay for the tax cuts that you're promising.
It will actually grow the economy, Sam. That's the point. Under the coalition, the tax burden will be much smaller. But, you know, Greg Combet, whose favourite word is mendacious, should have a look in the mirror right now, because he put his hand on his heart and said by 2015 the carbon price or the carbon tax will be $29 a tonne. Well, look what's happening in Europe. I mean, the floor has come out of it. This is a huge embarrassment for the Labor Party, and it's just not going to be good for the Australian economy, let alone for the environment.
All right, well, let's move on to another issue. The former co-founder of the One Nation Party, David Ettridge, is suing the opposition leader Tony Abbott for $1.5 million in relation to Tony Abbott's role in litigation against the party in 1998. Let's first hear from Tony Abbott there.
This arises from the campaign I waged about 15 years ago to expose what I thought was the dodgy nature of the One Nation Party. I was never particularly critical of One Nation supporters, but I certainly thought back then that it was a dodgy party, and that position of mine was vindicated by the courts. Now, obviously, the gentleman in question is entitled to go to court if he thinks he has a case, and that'll be dealt with by the courts in due course.
Lee Rhiannon, Tony Abbott says he went about that litigation in 1998 because he wanted to expose the dodgy nature of One Nation. Do you think he did the right thing back then?
Well, look, 2 points, and I think one of them might coincide a bit with what Mr Abbott said. It was interesting that Mr Ettridge's action was launched on the day that Pauline Hanson announced that she looks like she's going to contest a seat in the federal election. So it looks like it's out there, he's out there to raise the profile of that party. But also Mr Abbott, many see him as the Prime Minister in waiting. If he was associated with any dodgy political donations, it's talk of a slush fund with quite senior Liberal supporters and members like Peter Coleman, Trevor Kennedy and I think Howard Clough, that they have been associated with putting money into that fund that Mr Abbott used for this work, and he told the Australian Electoral Commission that it wasn't an associated entity. Now, there remains a question mark over that, right. So time and the court hopefully will sort this out.
All right, Josh Frydenberg, do you think there are questions to be answered here? Do we need to know about this slush fund, where the money came from to launch this litigation against One Nation back then?
Well, you know, as Tony Abbott said, this will be before the courts and everyone's entitled to do that, but he in no way regrets the actions he took to expose One Nation and Pauline Hanson. And I absolutely find it remarkable that, you know, Lee Rhiannon and the Greens are now attacking Tony Abbott for attacking Pauline Hanson and One Nation. I mean, how bizarre can you get? I mean, the fact is, One Nation and Pauline Hanson were very divisive. And, you know, Lee Rhiannon, rather than criticising Tony Abbott, should be actually applauding his actions. And it's quite remarkable that, you know, you're using this as an opportunity, you know, to kick the boot into him when he was taking very tough action against what he considered, rightly, a party that was divisive to the Australian nation.
Josh, you are being a bit sensitive there. I pointed out in the beginning of my comment that there was a similarity in my position and Mr Abbott's with concern about One Nation in how Mr Ettridge used his tactics. So that you can't face the need to have proper disclosure is a concern, Josh.
All right, well, let's move on to another issue. Of course, there's growing concern about the conditions at the detention facility on Manus Island. The Immigration Department has this week issued a scathing assessment of the conditions there. There's also worry about a group of Sri Lankan men who've been granted refugee status in this country but have received adverse ASIO assessments, so they remain in detention. Josh Frydenberg, to you first. Of course, many of those men are on hunger strikes, and a number of them have been treated in hospital in Melbourne. What's your response to that? What should be done now?
Well, all support to these men should be given. You know, we, at the end of the day, do not want to encourage anybody to take such drastic action as a hunger strike, and they should be getting the support that they need, and those hunger strikes should end. But, you know, when you talk about the situation on Manus Island, I mean, let's go back to first principles here. We're in this situation because the government has seen a complete breakdown in its border security. We've had more than 37,000 unauthorised arrivals, 1,500 in the last 2 weeks. This is the problem.
But in relation to that particular issue, that is that these refugees are receiving adverse ASIO assessments and are having prolonged time in detention, do you think something needs to happen there?
Well, the government has set up a review process where a retired federal court judge can check whether the processes adhered to by ASIO in making those security assessments are proper, and I'm personally very comfortable with that. I know some of my colleagues have a different view, but I'm personally very comfortable with that.
Is that something that you've raised with Tony Abbott? I mean, have you said to him that's the best way forward?
I'm raising it now, and I've raised it before, and my colleagues are aware of it. But the point is, you know, that ASIO have a very important job to do here, and they do it very well. And they do conduct rigorous assessments. And if a number of people are deemed to be
But you're now saying
security,
that a federal judge also needs to be involved, so you obviously have some concerns about the process.
Well, I'm always just interested in having that extra layer of surety here that the process has been adhered to. I'm in no way questioning the quality of the ASIO assessments, because I do believe that if somebody is deemed, Sam, to have a negative security assessment, then they shouldn't be allowed into the community.
All right, well, just briefly to you, Lee Rhiannon, on that issue, do you think it's enough to have a federal court judge now have a look at these matters?
On the first part of your question, Manus Island should be closed. On the second part, adverse security assessment, not many people realise that what that means is that these people, many of them who have been given refugee status, but because of a decision by ASIO, they now are effectively in prison, which is what a detention centre is, for the rest of their lives. No opportunity for appeal, no process at all, and that's what needs to change. In England, it's not like that. They can appeal. We need to have it in Australia.
All right, thanks very much. All right, well, we're out of time for today. Thank you very much, Lee Rhiannon, and to Josh Frydenberg. And that is Capitol Hill for today. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow. Until then, goodbye.